Hey guys, hope all is well. Today we are going to finish up chapter 12, Monopolistic Competition. So we did chapter 12, part A last. We learned about what monopolistic competition was, right? And if you recall, the only difference between monopolistic competition and perfect competition is what? That's right, the degree of product differentiation. So remember, we're not saying it's different products, we're saying product differentiation, meaning there's something that the firm is doing, perhaps, and probably advertising to get you to believe that their product is different slash better than someone else's product. And what that does is that gives them the ability to charge a slightly higher price than other firms. And then we have that downward sloping demand curve that a monopolistically competitive firm sees. Okay, so I want you to check out this video here. I also put the link down in the comments for this video, but this is the silliest example of somebody trying to differentiate their product, right? So you're gonna watch the video, you're gonna see some guy show up next to some guy giving away free hugs and say his $2 deluxe hugs are even better, right? He says, oh, mine, that guy smells a little bit and he doesn't really hug you well, and I'll hug you better, and I can kind of caress you and all this silliness, all right? So check that out, and it will be a good example to help you remember about product differentiation in the marketplace. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this product differentiation, since it is the defining aspect of monopolistic competition. Okay, and so something that I want to ask and I want us to think about is that how does the loss in efficiency relate to the degree of product differentiation? Recall that the very fact that the firm is differentiating their product, and some people actually think that this product is better than other products, they're willing to pay more, there's the downward sloping demand curve, and we have the two problems with monopolistic competition. Remember, that is markup, that's when price is over marginal cost, and there's excess capacity. That means when the firm produces less than what we, when we put on our socially benevolent dictator, as the socially benevolent dictator, we want the firm to produce more, but they're producing less. That's known as excess capacity. Now let's ask, do those two problems get worse or get better with the amount of product differentiation that the firm is able to successfully convince you of? All right. So if you think for a second, you can probably imagine that somebody with a high degree of product differentiation is going to be able to demand more for their product, right? If someone like Urban Outfitters or Hollister versus clothes at Walmart, they're able to demand more. You can imagine that that price is much higher over marginal cost. We have a bigger markup issue. On the other hand, if we have a low degree of product differentiation, and so some examples might be, I don't know, Domino's versus Pizza Hut, or Ross versus Marshall's, clothing stores, right? So these are low degrees of product differentiation. They can maybe make you pay a little bit more than their competitors, but not that much more, right? Domino's Pizza, if it's more than $1 or $2 more than a Pizza Hut pizza, you're not going to spring for it. You might pay an extra dollar or two, right? That's a low amount of product differentiation. So, in this world, we have low amounts of product differentiation. As a socially benevolent dictator, it's actually kind of a little bit better because we have less of this problem of excess capacity and less of this problem of markup. Okay, so let's jump into that a little bit, right? So a highly differentiated product means, what is that? Is it going to be more efficient or less efficient? Right, it's less efficient. We have higher prices, bigger markups, and larger excess capacity. So we have things that are not quite good for society. On the other hand, a less differentiated product means that we are closer to that ideal of perfect competition. So we have lower prices and markups, and we have less excess capacity. Okay, let me show you this on a graph. So in panel A, we're going to have the world of more product differentiation. Now think for a second, what is that going to do to the graph? That's going to make the demand curve seen by the firm much steeper, right? And then on the other panel, check this out. Here we have a firm with less product differentiation. And what's that going to do to the demand curve? You're right, it's going to be more flat, right? A shallower curve. It's going to look more like the demand curve in a perfectly competitive firm. Okay, and now let's make sure we review and you know why this is. This is not as steep as this curve. And that's because if they can succeed in making you believe that their product is truly different, that is to say, there is more product differentiation, you're willing to pay a higher price for it. Okay, now recall that in the long run, firms make how much profit in this market structure? It's zero economic profit, which means that they have to have the average total cost curve touching exactly the demand curve, so that the price that they make for their product, the price they're able to sell for, is the exact same as the cost of production, so they're making zero economic profit, right? And if you look at both of these worlds, they're both making zero economic profit, even in the more product differentiated panel. This is, of course, in the long run. In the short run, probably a firm like Hollister or Abercrombie with more product differentiation is going to be able to make a little bit of profit until the space does get crowded with their competitors. Okay, and then in the future, in the long run, once the competitors come in and drive long-run economic profits to zero, look at this. We have an excess capacity problem, right? Why is this the ideal spot? Well, remember, put on your socially benevolent dictator hat and think like a socially benevolent dictator. We want prices to be as low as possible. So we want production to occur at the bottom of the ATC. We want price to be at the minimum ATC, and we want that quantity. All right, so that's the socially efficient quantity. We have this excess capacity. Now look, come over to this side, and you see that the demand curve is much shallower. In effect, it's kind of like as if the demand curve, it used to be up here, and it kind of slid its way down to this point. All right, that's basically what's happening here. And if you look, the excess capacity problem is much smaller. Hopefully you can see, if you were to continue making this demand curve flat, it would eventually hit right here, and you'd have no excess capacity problem at all. You'd have perfect competition. Exactly. Okay. So, I mean, in general, we're like, hey, product differentiation, not so great, not for society, not as a social benevolent dictator. It might be great for the firm for a little bit. It helps them reap large profits in the short run, but not even in the long run. So you might be tempted to think, hey, let's have no product differentiation. That's silly, right? Product differentiation is hurting our society in terms of efficiency. That's partially true, okay? But let's ask this question, right? Is this inefficiency so bad? Let me show you two scenarios, okay? Let's suppose let's just create this world, we'll call it situation A, and we'll say there's no product differentiation in the world of pizza. That means what do I have available to eat? I have Pizza Hut, Pizza Hut, Pizza Hut. All the takeout pizza restaurants are the same, right? There's no dining in right now, it's all taking out. So all the takeout pizza is the same. All looks or tastes like Pizza Hut. You choose any brand you want. Okay, what is that going to do? Well, we know that the prices are going to be slightly lower because we've turned it into perfect competition, and we know that the slightly higher quantities, right? And so as a socially benevolent dictator, we might think, hey, that's excellent. We're moving towards efficiency, and that is correct. But what's the con, or what's the downside? Well, all pizzas are exactly the same. There's only Pizza Hut pizza. Maybe I want something slightly different, okay? So that's scenario one, and let's look at the other scenario. This is how pizza is today. Pizza's slightly different, right? Papa John's is slightly different than Pizza Hut, which is slightly different than DiGiorno, for example, or Domino's. And we know that that's going to allow the firms to charge slightly higher prices because they can say, hey, look, this is a Papa John's pizza, pay a little bit more. And that means that the quantities are slightly lower as compared to the world we just imagined, right? However, what's the benefit of this? Man, we have more variety and choice. There's many different types of styles of pizza being made at the different restaurants. And so that gives us, as consumers, that gives us options that we didn't otherwise have. Okay, so on one hand, we have the badness of the efficiency. On the other hand, we have the goodness of the choice that maybe kind of offsets those inefficiencies, right? So something to think about. Like so many other things in economics, there is no right or wrong answer. You take the data, you take the facts, and you look at the situation, and you figure out which is more important, okay? And that's a you decision based on your judgment and your values. All right, let's also talk about advertising in the world of monopolistic competition. Because you know what? You might not have thought about this, but there's no reason to advertise in perfect competition, nor is there a reason to advertise a monopoly, right? Perfect competition, everybody's selling the same product anyway, and you're not able to change the price of your product, and you just have to sell it at the market price, whatever they tell you. So there's no reason to advertise. It won't help you, it'll only increase your costs. On the other hand, as a monopolist, is there any need to advertise? Well, not really. You're the only firm in there. They might want to advertise to try to stimulate more demand or teach people about their product. But from a competitive standpoint, there's no reason for a monopolist to advertise. On the other hand, monopolistic competition, this is the world of advertising. Remember, what are we trying to do? We're trying to tell people that our product is different, okay? So perhaps maybe it changes the demand for your product, right? And that's, if you take a look at Times Square here, you see like all of this advertising going on. That's one of the things people are trying to do, right? They're trying to tell you that Kodak film or Kodak cameras are better than Fujifilm cameras, for example. All right, let's check this out. So let's suppose that the firm has this demand curve that they see. Now, don't get confused. Firms are supply curves. Customers are demand curves. And this, though, is the customers of one particular firm. This isn't even the market demand curve. This is just the demand curve for one firm's customers, okay? And when they advertise, what does that probably do? It probably pushes it up. We say it increases demand. So you see how the demand curve might increase. I have it here increasing both in steepness and moving over to the right. It doesn't necessarily have to. This is typically what we think, how we think it happens though, because look at this. This is less elastic, that is more inelastic. Excuse me, this is more elastic, this is more inelastic. And as people advertise, as firms advertise and people believe it, they become kind of more addicted to that product and they are willing to pay higher prices. That is another way of saying more inelastic demand. Okay, let's talk about another reason besides just increasing demand for the product, which is one. Let's see here. What about providing information to consumers, right? And so this is really important in monopolistic competition because what's the whole point of monopolistic competition? Try to make people think that your product is different / better than other people's product, right? That's called product differentiation. So we need to provide the information to consumers to do that. All right. It can definitely be a form of non-price competition. Hey, my advertisements are better than your advertisements, right? Budweiser always tries to have the coolest Super Bowl advertisement for just this reason, okay? Another reason that people advertise is it might signal quality, right? If I am producing a legitimate product, I will gain enough profits to go ahead and advertise on television, for example, because we all know that that's pretty expensive, okay? And so you might have noticed that every year, talking about Super Bowl commercials, they always end up saying, hey, a 30-second spot, that's a name for a commercial, costs $3 million this year in the Super Bowl. You're like, why are they so interested that we know how much a spot costs? It's because they want to show that, hey, I can afford to purchase this TV advertisement because my product is good or higher quality. It's different, product differentiation. All right, so now that we kind of think about the different reasons for advertising, let's go back to that other question. Which markets do we see more or less advertising, right? In perfect competition, there's no reason for it, right? Firms that advertise will have higher costs than rivals and there's no gains, so they'll go out of business. Now, sometimes in perfect competition, you might see advertising at the industry level. So this is really interesting. If you ever see advertising at the industry level, not for a firm, but for a product or a whole industry, it's a good signal that this is probably pretty close to a perfectly competitive industry. So what is one of the most famous industry level advertisements? Milk, right? You see those milk mustaches that are, they paint on athletes and they say, you know, milk builds strong bones. There's also the industry level advertisement of beef. It's what for dinner, right? So these are clues that they're advertising at the industry level, not to try to say that one firm has better product than another, but that's just to make people aware of milk and beef and buy more of it, okay? All right, now let's think about monopolistic competition. Now advertising is important for increasing sales. All right, and so it's intended to increase its sales at the expense of its competitors, right? So it increases demand for one firm's product, and then the gains from advertising go to the firm. So let's come back to our pizza example, because this is a great example of a market structure in a monopolistically competitive market. Okay, we have Papa John's, Pizza Hut, Domino's, right? Want some pizza? These advertisements are not intended to make you just want pizza. It's to make you want their brand of pizza and somehow make you think that they're better. Okay, all right. Let's think about a monopoly. Does a monopolist need to advertise? Well, less likely, since the product has no close substitutes and consumer choice is limited. All right, and so you don't tend to see a whole lot of advertisement in monopolies. One example of monopoly advertising that we do see, remember we talk about good old De Beers, huge diamond monopoly, right? And so the reason that they might advertise is to inform the consumer about the product and to stimulate the demand, but it's not to steal demand or to differentiate their product. Okay. All right. So now we've talked a little bit about what advertising is and who does it. Let's ask the question as a good socially benevolent dictator would. Let's put on our hats, right? What are the negative effects of advertising? Is it good for society or bad for society? Well, let's first talk about this thing that's called the paradox of advertising. Let's suppose that there are our good old examples, Domino's and Papa John's. Okay, suppose Domino's advertises, all right? All else equal, if just Domino's is the only pizza, takeout pizza place that is advertising, its sales will increase and it will be able to recover its costs. But is Domino's the only person that advertises? Of course not. Papa John's responds its own advertising campaign, okay? And so does every other takeout pizza place. In the end, though, think about what happens after Papa John's responds with its own advertising campaign. The customer that would have gone to Domino's stay with Papa John's. They actually get no net new customers. Do you see how this works? Okay, so the firms, they're advertising, but they're not actually getting more customers. Their sales remaining the same, but now they have higher costs. Okay, this is a form of something that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's called a prisoner's dilemma. We're stuck. Neither firm actually wants to advertise. They're like, man, if we could just not advertise, we would have lower costs and we'd have the exact same amount of customers and we would do better. One of the most notable examples in the 70s, the two main tobacco companies, Winston and R.J. Reynolds, were engaged in this exact same sort of advertising dilemma. And neither of them, they were two firms, it's called a duopoly, engaged in market, and they were both spending millions of dollars on television advertising. And it wasn't getting them any new customers. You know what they did? They actually lobbied Congress to make television advertising for cigarettes illegal. Brilliant, right? So they made this law. You can't advertise on television. That actually helped them both. Believe it or not, the people who were behind the lobbyists for making television advertising of cigarettes illegal was cigarette firms themselves, because they needed to prevent this thing called a business stealing externality. They didn't want to have to advertise. The only reason they were advertising is to prevent the other firm from stealing their business. They were actually both happier not advertising. So it's kind of something interesting to think about, right? If you think about it in terms of the cost curve, right? So this is your long run average total cost curve before you advertise, right? And let's say that you're able to, with no advertising, you sell Q1 products, okay? Well, let's say you decide to advertise. It makes your long-run average total cost curve increase, right? Because you have an increase. This increase here is from the extra cost of advertising, but what do you hope it does? Yes, you hope that it also increases your quantity of sales. And if you look, even though this curve is higher, I'm at a different place on the curve. I've moved over. And so at point 2, which is with advertising, my average total cost is lower. Why? Because I'm able to sell a lot more. Okay, do you see how that works? So I'm able to sell more products. I get more economies of scale. Overall, it's cheaper per product with advertising, even though I'm paying higher costs. That might seem strange. It's because I'm selling more units. Okay, but what happens? Does the firm that's advertising, are they the only person that advertises? No, not at all. Every other firm starts advertising too, and though they had a brief moment where they were able to produce more, once everybody else advertises, everybody else goes back to what they were buying, and so they go back to selling Q1 again, and so they're stuck up here at 0.3. Oh man, this is a bummer. Now they're up really, really high on their ATC curve, right? And so they've just shot themselves in the foot. Basically, all they did was increase their costs. No new customers, no new revenue. An increase in cost means a decrease in profit, or perhaps even losses, all right? So this is no good. So the advertising can be actually really destructive, especially if there's only a very few firms in the marketplace. You know what? I bet that Papa John's, Domino's, and Pizza Hut, if there was some way that they could convince each other not to advertise, they'd probably be better off. Right? You're not going to buy less pizza if they stop advertising, but they'll have fewer costs. So, let's think about some other things that, first there's wasted money that advertising is a negative. What other things that might be negative for advertising? It inspires brand loyalty or creates brand loyalty. Oh, well, why is that a bad thing? Well, think about this. If you're loyal to a brand, they know they've got you. They don't care about you. They care about your dollars. And if you're going to pay more because you're loyal to a brand, it means that your demand curve is more inelastic. We know what firms do. If they are faced with an inelastic demand curve, they raise it. They raise the price to try to take advantage of that. Okay? So if you look at these pictures, look at this one on the right. What is that? You recognize that blue box, right? If you ever want to buy a gift for a significant other in your life, you might be persuaded to go to the store. What is it? Yes, it's Tiffany's, right? Why don't you go buy whatever you're going to spend $300 for at Tiffany's, you can buy at Walmart, probably same, just as good for $43, right? But it doesn't come in the nice little box, okay? Tiffany's just got you for, what is that, $257 extra dollars, okay? Just because they did some advertising and they convinced you, or more likely your significant other, that it was worth that extra $257, right? They got you. This sort of brand loyalty is actually detrimental from a societal standpoint if we put on our socially benevolent dictator hat, okay? All right. So let's think about the claims that they make in advertising, right? They make a lot of claims. Should we think of them as being persuasive or maybe as informative, right? Well, both. But advertising can definitely be manipulative. They can try to convince you that you need something that you don't have to make your life better. Firms may have an incentive to kind of lie about their products. Now, it's true that the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, regulates advertising. They have what are called truth in advertising laws. They regulate food, drugs, supplements, alcohol, and tobacco. So it's not everything, but it's a large swath of the advertisements we see on television. There are truth in advertising laws, but still, even if there's truth, you still have persuasive advertising all the time, right? And not necessarily informative. Informative would be like, here is some information about our product. Persuasive advertising says, here is why you should buy our product instead of a competitor's product, and this is why your life is going to be better. Persuasive, okay? And so firms have an incentive to engage in this sort of persuasive advertising, and as a socially benevolent dictator, we put on our hat, we must think that this is not beneficial for society. Okay, so in conclusion, monopolistic competition. When does it exist? It exists when there's many competing firms producing differentiated products. Remember, once again, not different, differentiated. Everything else is the same as perfect competition, with the exception of the product differentiation. So it does have the features of both perfect competition and it does have the feature of monopoly. It's definitely closer to perfect competition than the monopoly in terms of its prices, output, and efficiency. So the prices are a little bit higher than perfect competition, but they're not super high like in a monopoly. There is a deadweight loss. Remember that term, DWL. There is a deadweight loss, just like is in monopoly, but it's much smaller than monopoly. Okay, and monopolistic competition, in my opinion, is the most prevalent market structure in our economy. Okay, most of the firms out there are competing in what's called the monopolistically competitive market structure. So that's why it's really important to understand. Okay, and so that wraps up everything that we have about monopolistic competition. Make sure that you understand the features of monopolistic competition and how to find the profit maximizing P and Q in the short run, and then how to know when that's at the long run. Hint, it's in the long run when there is zero economic profits, because the demand curve and the average total cost curve are just barely touching, right? If the average total cost curve is below the demand curve, we're making a profit. If it's above it, they're making a loss. Either way, it's going to come back to the spot. Oops, the ATC curve doesn't move. The demand curve moves until we get to the point where they're making zero long-run economic profit. All right, remember that, and have a great day.